the first thing I noticed was the silence. Not the peaceful, sleepy silence of a Sunday morning, but the heavy, suffocating kind that presses down on you right after a bomb has gone off. Caleb was sitting at the kitchen table, still in his pajama bottoms and a crisp, button-down shirt, his interview shirt. The laptop was closed. He'd just finished the most important interview of his life, a video call for a partnership position he'd been chasing for years. The morning sun streamed in, catching the dust motes dancing in the air, making the whole scene feel surreal, like a painting of a disaster. He wasn't looking at me. He was staring at his own reflection in the dark screen of the laptop, his expression completely blank. Then, without turning his head, he spoke. His voice was quiet, almost a whisper, but it cut through the silence like a shard of glass. "You know," he said, "for a second there, I really thought you wouldn't do it." That was it. That was the moment I knew my carefully constructed test hadn't just failed. It had detonated, and I was standing at ground zero, completely clueless about how I'd lost a war I didn't even realize I was fighting. When I met Caleb, it felt like coming home after being lost in a storm for years. My previous relationship had ended with a brutal, textbook case of cheating that had completely dismantled my sense of self-worth. My ex, a man who thrived on keeping me off balance, had a talent for making me feel like an afterthought. He'd remember the anniversary of a business deal, but forget my birthday. He'd praise his colleagues effusively, but offer me only faint, backhanded compliments. He left a deep, festering wound in my psyche, a core belief that I was fundamentally unimportant and easily forgotten. I was a mess of insecurities, constantly seeking validation, convinced that I was destined to be a supporting character in everyone else's story. Then came Caleb. He was solid. A civil engineer, a man who dealt in certainties, in blueprints and stress tests and solid foundations. His entire world was about building things that were meant to last, and he applied that same ethos to our relationship. He was calm where I was chaotic, patient where I was frantic. He listened, not just waiting for his turn to speak, but actually hearing me. He remembered the little things, the way I took my coffee, the name of my childhood dog, that I hated the sound of people chewing ice. For the first time, I felt safe. I felt seen. But the ghost of my past was a relentless tenant in my mind. The trauma had hardwired a terrible, self-destructive program into my brain: test him, push him, see if he'll leave too. It started small, almost imperceptibly. I'd accidentally leave my phone at home and then feel a sick thrill when I saw he'd called 3 times, worried. I'd mention a passing comment from a male friend just to gauge his reaction, craving a spark of jealousy that would prove he cared. He never took the bait. He'd just say, "He sounds like a good friend," and my inner demon would scream in frustration. The biggest test came about a year into our relationship. He had a rare guy's night planned, a poker game with friends he hadn't seen in months. An hour before he was due to leave, I called him at his office, carefully pitching my voice to tremble, claiming a sudden, splitting migraine had left me dizzy and nauseous. He was home in 20 minutes, no questions asked, holding a glass of water and painkillers. He spent the rest of the night reading quietly beside me while I feigned sleep, my heart a tangled mess of guilt and triumphant relief. He passed, he chose me. But the next day, he sat me down. His face wasn't angry, but it was serious, etched with a kind of weary disappointment that was far worse. "Isla," he said, his voice gentle but firm, "I will always be there for you. Always. But a relationship has to be built on a foundation of trust, not a series of stress tests. Please don't do that again. I need to know that when you need me, it's real." I swore I wouldn't. I cried, I apologized, I felt the shame curl in my stomach. And I meant it. I truly, genuinely meant it at that moment. But the sickness inside me, the gnawing fear of being abandoned, was patient. It just waited for a bigger stage. And Caleb's partnership interview was the biggest stage of all. It was everything to him, the culmination of a decade of grinding work, late nights, and missed holidays. It was his chance to finally build something for himself, for us, and all my damaged brain could see was a threat. The week leading up to the interview was intense. Caleb entered a state of monastic focus, and our apartment transformed into his personal war room. The air itself seemed to crackle with his nervous energy. He was either at the office, locked in his study, or pacing the living room, muttering about market projections and 5-year growth strategies. He built a small fortress of documents on his desk. Binders filled with printed case studies, yellow legal pads covered in his precise, architectural handwriting, and a stack of industry reports bristling with colored tabs. He was in his element, a man preparing for the battle of his career, and I had never felt more invisible. I became a ghost in our home. I'd make him dinner, and he'd eat it at his desk, his eyes glued to a screen, offering a distracted "thanks, baby" without looking up. I'd try to start a conversation about my day, and his answers would be monosyllabic, his mind clearly 1,000 miles away, wrestling with shareholder value propositions. I knew, logically, that this was temporary. I knew it was about the job, the pressure, the sheer weight of his ambition. A healthy, supportive partner would have understood. She would have made him coffee, kept the house quiet, and been his silent, unwavering cheerleader. I tried to be that person. For the first couple of days, I really did. But the insecure, wounded part of my brain, the part my ex had so carefully cultivated, started whispering its toxic narrative. See, you don't matter. The moment something truly important comes along, you cease to exist. The whispers grew louder each day, morphing into a deafening roar of anxiety. I started to see his ambition not as something we were building together, but as a force that was pulling him away from me. Once he gets this partnership, he won't need you anymore. You'll just be the girl he comes home to, a comfortable piece of furniture. The idea, when it first surfaced, was ugly and monstrous. It slithered into my thoughts on Wednesday night as I watched him meticulously arrange his papers in his leather briefcase. What if all that just disappeared? I shoved the thought down, horrified at my own capacity for such cruelty. But it was persistent. It was a plan born of pure desperation, a twisted, pathetic attempt to reassert my own gravity in his orbit. The logic was deranged, but in my panic state, it felt like the only solution. I would create a crisis, a sudden, terrifying problem that only I could solve. I would make him need me, viscerally, at his most vulnerable moment. On the night before his interview, after he fell into an exhausted sleep, I would take his briefcase, the one containing all his physical materials, his printed notes, his lucky pen his father gave him, and I would hide it. In my sick, distorted fantasy, the morning would play out like a scene from a movie. He would wake up, realize it was gone, and panic. Pure, unadulterated panic. His carefully constructed world would crumble. He would be frantic, lost, on the verge of collapse. And then I would emerge as his savior. After letting him suffer for just the right amount of time, savoring his desperation, I would miraculously find the briefcase. The relief on his face would be overwhelming. He would hug me, thank me, and in that moment of profound gratitude, he would be reminded of just how essential I was to his life. He couldn't do it without me. That was the story I told myself, a pathetic fairy tale where I was both the villain and the hero. I was so consumed by the need to prove my own importance that I didn't stop to think about what I was actually doing. Sabotaging the man I claimed to love. I was a fully aware, clear-eyed saboteur marching toward a cliff of my own making, and I couldn't stop myself. The plan went into motion just after 2 a.m. I'd been lying awake for hours. My heart hammering against my ribs, a toxic cocktail of adrenaline and shame coursing through me. Caleb was fast asleep, breathing deeply, a soft, trusting rhythm that made my betrayal feel even more monstrous. The quiet hum of the city outside was the only sound. Slipping out of bed, my feet cold on the hardwood floor, I tiptoed into the living room where his briefcase sat by the door. A leather sentinel guarding his future. It felt heavier than it looked, weighted not just with paper, but with his hopes. My hands trembled as I picked it up. Every rational instinct screamed at me to put it back, to go back to bed and pretend this insane idea had never entered my head. But the insidious voice of my fear was stronger, a venomous whisper in my ear. He needs this lesson. He needs to remember you exist. I carried it like a bomb to the back of our hall closet, a cluttered space filled with old coats and things we never used. The air inside was stale, thick with the scent of forgotten memories. At the very bottom, beneath a dusty box of my old college textbooks, was a large, forgotten wicker chest. I lifted the heavy lid, the creak of the hinges sounding like a scream in the silent apartment. I buried the briefcase there, pushing it deep under a pile of old sweaters that smelled faintly of cedar and regret. The click of the chest's latch was the sound of a cell door locking. My part was done. Now, all I had to do was wait for the chaos I had so meticulously engineered. I didn't sleep. I just lay there, a statue of anxiety, rehearsing my lines, preparing my performance of shocked innocence. When the first gray light of dawn filtered through the blinds, I was jolted not by an alarm, but by the quiet, methodical sounds of Caleb getting ready. It was earlier than I expected. I lay in bed, my breathing shallow, feigning sleep as my ears strained to catch the first signs of his panic. I had my script ready. I would feign grogginess, then wide-eyed concern, and finally I'd become the determined, loving search party. But the frantic searching, the cursing, the desperate tearing apart of the apartment, it never began. Instead, he walked into the bedroom, already wearing his crisp white interview shirt. He stood in front of his dresser for a moment, adjusting his cuffs in the mirror. He looked composed, focused. Then he turned to me. "Isla," he said, his voice unnervingly calm, "have you seen my briefcase?" This was it, showtime. I sat up, making a show of rubbing the sleep from my eyes. "Your briefcase?" "No, honey, isn't it by the door where you always leave it?" I injected the perfect amount of sleepy confusion into my voice. He just looked at me. He didn't accuse, he didn't yell. He just held my gaze for a few long, unbearable seconds, and in his eyes, I saw something I'd never seen before. Not anger, but a deep, chilling clarity. It was like he was looking right through my flimsy performance, at the ugly, scared creature pulling the strings. "Okay," he said softly, the word hanging in the air between us. He then turned and walked out of the bedroom. My own panic began to set in. This wasn't right. I followed him into the living room, my heart starting to thud with a new kind of fear. "What do you mean, okay?" I asked, my voice a little too high. "We have to find it. Where did you last see it?" He ignored me. He wasn't looking for it. He didn't check under the sofa or behind the curtains. He just went to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and then went into his study. A minute later, he came out, walked back to the bedroom, and pulled on a pair of gray, worn-out pajama pants. My mind was reeling, short-circuiting. What was he doing? Where was the desperation? Where was my heroic moment? He then went back to the kitchen table, opened his laptop, straightened his shirt one last time, and logged into the video call. He was wearing his best shirt and his worst pajama bottoms, sitting down for the biggest meeting of his life as if absolutely nothing was wrong. I stood in the doorway, a useless, pathetic stagehand in a play that had suddenly gone terrifyingly, horribly off script. The hour that followed was the longest of my life. I sat on the sofa, frozen, listening to the muffled sound of Caleb's voice from the kitchen. It was steady, confident. I could hear him using industry terms, laughing occasionally at what I assumed was a joke from one of the interviewers. He sounded like a man in complete control, not like someone whose entire preparation had been stolen from him. My carefully planned crisis had evaporated, leaving behind a thick, poisonous fog of dread. I felt sick. What had I missed? How was he doing this? Finally, I heard him say, "Thank you for your time. I look forward to hearing from you." A few clicks, and then the suffocating silence returned. He closed the laptop. For a full minute, he just sat there, staring at the blank screen, the same way he had when I first woke up. I couldn't breathe. I knew the verdict of my own trial was about to be delivered. Slowly, he turned his chair to face me. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes were filled with a profound, bottomless exhaustion. I started to babble, the words tumbling out in a pathetic, incoherent rush. "Caleb, I am so sorry. I don't know what I was thinking. I was just so scared you were slipping away, and I wanted you to need me. I just wanted." He held up a hand, and I fell silent. "It's okay, Isla," he said, and the calmness of his voice was more terrifying than any scream. "I got the offer. They want me to start in 2 weeks." The news barely registered. "But how?" I stammered. "Your notes, the case studies, everything was in the briefcase." He let out a long, slow breath. "I have backups of everything in the cloud, Isla. I have for years." He paused, and then he delivered the blow that shattered my entire reality. "After you faked that migraine last year, I had a feeling. I knew that your fear sometimes makes you do things you don't fully control. I hoped I was wrong. I hoped you would trust me, trust us. But I started preparing for the possibility that you might test me again, especially when something big was on the line." He looked directly at me, and for the first time, I saw the deep well of hurt behind his composure. I spent last night making sure every single file I needed was accessible from any device, anywhere. I had a contingency plan. For you. The words hung in the air, each one a separate, stinging indictment. A contingency plan, for me. He had seen my sabotage coming. He had planned for it. He had quietly and efficiently built a firewall against my own sickness. I kept hoping I wouldn't need it, he continued, his voice cracking just a little. This morning, when I couldn't find the briefcase, I gave you a chance. I asked you. And I swear, Isla, for a second, I really thought you wouldn't do it. I thought you'd say, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry, I moved it while cleaning," or some other excuse. But you didn't. He shook his head slowly. I used to think my job was to build structures that could withstand anything. But I can't live my life building emotional bomb shelters to protect myself from the person I love. I can't do it. The foundation is broken. It's been 6 weeks. Caleb moved out the following weekend. There was no drama, no shouting match. His departure was as methodical and efficient as his interview preparation. He packed his boxes, hired a mover, and was gone by Sunday afternoon. He didn't ask for my help, and he didn't want to talk. When he left, he paused at the door, looked at the empty space where his briefcase used to sit, and then looked at me. "I really hope you get the help you need, Isla," he said. Then he closed the door, and the click of the lock was the sound of my world ending. Of course, he got the job. He's a partner now. I know this because I've become a pathetic, obsessive digital ghost haunting the edges of his new life. He blocked me on everything immediately: Facebook, Instagram, even my number. But he forgot about LinkedIn, or maybe he just didn't care. It's a professional site after all. What harm could I do? The harm, it turns out, is entirely self-inflicted. I spend my nights, hollowed out and sleepless, scrolling through his profile. I see the updates. Excited to announce my new role as partner at Sterling Advisory Group. 147 likes. Congratulations from people I've never met. A week ago, the company posted a team photo from a charity gala. He was there, standing in the back row, smiling. Not a huge, joyful smile, but a calm, contented one. He was wearing a new suit. He looked lighter. Free. There's a woman next to him in the photo, a colleague, her hand resting casually on his arm as they both laugh at something off camera. I've zoomed in on that picture so many times that the pixels have become a blurry, abstract painting of my own personal hell. I've memorized her name, her job title, the university she went to. I've constructed an entire narrative of their life together in my head. Each post, each like, each new connection he makes is another twist of the knife. I'm trapped, endlessly refreshing a page that documents, in crisp corporate detail, the wonderful life he's building on the rubble of the one I destroyed.